Welcome to Resilience Unravelled. Hi everybody and welcome to Resilience Unravelled, a podcast that examines all aspects of personal and organisational resilience. A huge all-encompassing subject that covers the ability to thrive in life by harnessing your cognitive, emotional, physiological and contextual abilities. I share stories from people who have thrived despite remarkable obstacles, as well as highly successful practitioners and experts across a range of topics. And this podcast introduces their amazing stories and expertise, as well as my own reflections, perspectives, strategies and tips, which come from my own synthesis of themes and trends from wider learning. You can go to qedod.com/extras to access offers, tools and resources, including free articles and ebooks. For those of you that would be interested in supporting our work and contributing more proactively, you can find our new Patreon page at patreon.com. Then search for Resilience Space Unravelled. So, let's get started. Enjoy the show. So welcome back to Resilience Unravelled. And today, a new guest, Geoff Holt is his name. And he's sitting in front of me, looking all glorious and gorgeous on his computer screen. And he works or has run an organisation I want to go find out a lot more about, which is called Wet Wheels Foundation, which sounds absolutely fascinating. But first of all, good morning, Geoff. How are you doing?
Good morning, Russell. Yeah, good to see you too. I'm really well, thank you.
Good. And I can tell from your accent, you're across a different pond. So you're obviously in England somewhere. Tell me where you are.
Yeah, I am tucked away in a village called Wallington in Fareham, which is very near to Portsmouth. It's on the south coast of England, sort of meters, if you will, from the water.
Very good. And actually, having known that now, I mean, literally, we could have done this through our bedroom windows or something, through the office windows, because we're probably about 8 miles apart. There's irony of this, isn't it? So great, Geoff. Thanks for... What's that, sorry?
I said, yeah, technology is amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, good. Well, tell us a little bit about yourself. What is it you would describe, how do you describe what it is you do?
Well, for those people that haven't heard of me or know of me, I describe myself as a seafaring adventurer. That all sounds very swashbuckling, doesn't it? I guess it's important to make it clear up front for those that don't know that I'm actually a wheelchair user. I'm paralysed from the chest down. I broke my neck in a swimming accident in the Virgin Islands 36 years ago this year.
Wow.
So I've spent the vast majority of my life in a wheelchair. But sailing and boating and the water has been my life. It was before my accident and it has been since. So I'm very much, I'd class myself as an adventurer and someone who spends his life trying to get as many disabled people as they can to experience the freedom of being out on the water.
Wow. Okay. Well, you better take us through the story of how you got from there to here. So please unpack it for us. So what were you doing before the accident? What was the life meant to be?
I was one of these young people who left home at 16 because I didn't know what I wanted to do, and I jumped on a sailboat.
Right.
And over the next 2 years, I sailed the Atlantic Ocean several times. I worked for some very wealthy people on some enormous boats in the Mediterranean and in the Caribbean. And I took the dream job when I was 18. I was going to be the youngest skipper in the Virgin Islands. Wow. Of a luxury charter sailboat. I flew out to the Virgin Islands. I joined the boat, completed my paperwork, went to the beach. About an hour later, ran down one of the most beautiful beaches in the world called Cane Garden Bay in Tortola. Ran as far as I could. Water got to my knees. Dived forward like you see them doing in Baywatch, trying to be all macho, and I hit my head on a sandbar, and it broke my neck. I was 18 and a half years old. They eventually flew me to Puerto Rico, and then, without getting into the politics of it, the government wouldn't fly me home. So eventually there was a mercy flight that got me back to Salisbury in England. And I spent the next year in hospital. And so that was a long time ago. I was a young lad. I'd achieved quite a lot by that age, 35,000 miles at sea. And here it was taken away from me. So that was a bit of a shock.
Yeah. So I mean, like you said, I mean, it's that thing about the single random action that sometimes happens in people's lives that, has this
It's
devastating
the
consequence.
I guess it's kind of almost a metaphor for life in many ways. It's that, it's the uncertainty of life, isn't it? You
Mm.
don't know what's around the corner. You know, here's one for you. So I spent a year in hospital and I left with my nurse, Elaine. And Elaine and
Oh,
I have been married 34 years now.
yeah.
And had I not had the accident, I wouldn't have met Elaine.
Yes.
So I'm not saying necessarily a believer in things happen for a reason, but I
No.
am a believer in, doors open in your life, and you come across junctions in your life and things happen. And I've learned over the years, as we'll be talking about in a minute, how to take advantage of those, and actually capitalize on them, and end up not just living, but actually, not just surviving, but thriving.
Yes. And I guess, and I talk to many people on these podcasts, and you hear this accident or issue or illness or whatever, and then it seems like this very seamless rise to glory and fame afterwards. But people often don't realize that there's a lot of dark days, aren't there? There are, in order to be resilient, you've got to come back from something. So do you want to talk us a little bit through some of the gritty bit, the less glamorous bits, as it were?
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, one has to understand that I went from an 18, 19-year-old lad to someone who relied on personal care 24 hours a day.
Yeah.
I need to be lifted in and out of bed. I need to be washed and clothed and fed, and all of those things. And you have to learn to live your life again. And people only ever see the smiley Geoff now.
Yeah.
And they hear of the amazing things that I've been fortunate to do, but they don't see that hard work. And I realized at an early age I could spend the rest of my life living at home on benefits, state benefits from the government, or I could get off my backside and actually go and do something. So I retrained in computing. This was in the late 80s when no one had heard of a mobile phone and computers were only just becoming popular. And I trained in database management, and I got a job with a firm. They were a little known firm at the time, but many people will know the name Deloitte. And I ended up working for Deloitte for 20 years, and I became head of marketing and business development for Deloitte in their Southwest offices. So the reason for telling you that is that enabled me to achieve my aspirations of, becoming financially secure, buying my first house, holidays, marriage, all of those things, starting a family, and all of that. I remember the early days of getting up at 4 or 5 in the morning, my wife getting up so she can get me up to get me to work, and no one sees that. It's also, you could argue, it's quite private. You don't want everyone to share every moment of that journey.
Yeah. Yes. Yes, I understand that. That makes a lot of sense. And it's the relentlessness of it as well, isn't it? It's, you have these days of glory and such like, but actually it's like every single day, 4 o'clock, as you say, or whatever time it is, that you have to do that routine. So where do you get that? I mean, where do you suspect, or where do you think you get that energy to have that grit, to have that determination, to do what needs to be done?
So I believe, and I have asked my question this before, I believe partly because I was able-bodied for 18, 19 years.
Yeah.
And I had an almost an oblivious understanding that I would, if I wanted to achieve something, I could. So suddenly having this disability forced upon you, I just found it incredible that anyone would discriminate against me.
Yes.
And so I guess there was, and I have thought about this during my days of working for Deloitte. I would quite deliberately, when I was feeling poorly or having a bad day, I would still go into work, because I never ever wanted someone to be thinking, yeah, he's disabled. I understand that he's disabled. He wants, he can't make it like everyone else. And so there was this private element of me trying to prove myself that I was as good as anybody else.
Right.
But in reality, you have to try twice as hard.
Yes.
And they don't see all the the stuff in the background, of course. They only see you turning up for work every day. And I guess that kind of then led into my sailing. I was doing sailing as a hobby. I got back into disabled sailing in the early 90s, because it was something. It was a passion. It was a real passion, and it felt like when I had the accident, it felt like a bereavement, and
it would.
Not being able to get back in a boat. It was my life. It wasn't part of my life. It was my life.
It was your life, yeah.
And it was taken away from me, and so that was a momentous moment when I got back in a boat for the first time in 1991.
So, without seeming to ask you something really trivial, but how does it work with a wheelchair on a boat? Because I'm guessing you're not talking about the QM2 here. You're talking about something smallish, aren't you?
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely. It's good to be able to explain this, because people do think to themselves and they don't ask. So the first boats that I was sailing were little sailing dinghies. So it's something called a trimaran. So the trimaran has 3 hulls. It was 15 foot long, so maybe a bit longer than your dining room table. And I was lifted. I had to be lifted into the middle hull, and there was only 2 controls. And there was what we call the main sheet, which is 1 rope, and that pulls in the sail over your head. So that's like the accelerator. Yeah. And there was a little metal bar in front of me, which was the tiller, which steers the boat. And I would wrap the rope around my arm, put it in my teeth, pull it in to pull the sail in, and steer the boat with the tiller. And that Challenger trimaran was my reintroduction back into sailing. And once I was back in that boat, and I realised I could do it on my own. Yeah. No one was telling me which way to go. I was making the boat go faster, slower. That was like an epiphany to me, and I realised then that, do you know what? I need to get back on the water. It was my life, and I missed it. And I'm jumping a bit, but 10 years later.
But before you do, just to jump in there, because you can sense that liberation. But I'm guessing there are a load of risks as well. And sometimes you have to do the risk management piece, don't you? Because, I mean, if this thing flips over, I'm guessing that might not be great for you.
Yeah. And I've fallen out of the boat. I've fallen out of the boat three times.
Really?
So, but, I'm still here to tell the tale.
Yes.
You're absolutely right. This is a really interesting point. So, there comes risk. Someone asked me once if I was reckless. Someone asked this question: is it reckless what you do? And I got quite cross, because I'm a father, I'm a husband, and I would never do anything to jeopardize my life. So it is about managing risk. It absolutely about managing risk. And interestingly, in years to come, when I was to do some quite high-profile sailing, I sailed around Britain and across the Atlantic. Wow. When I did those, I needed sponsorship. And sponsorship, what they want in return is they want column inches in the papers.
Yes.
They want minutes of you on television, and the only way you're going to get that, this is quite an interesting point. There's like this: you're walking a very thin line between jeopardy and safety, yes. And ultimately they want to know that the worst case scenario is you could be hit by a killer whale and eaten by sharks, hit by a hurricane. And that's the story they want to hear.
Yes.
And you tell them that story. But meanwhile, on the other hand, you've got everything covered. I never sailed in strong winds at the time. I had the right life jacket. So it's a good question, though.
I'm hoping you had some of that Batman shark repellent spray as well. Do you remember that from the 60s? Goodness me.
What do they say? That as long as you can swim faster than the person next
to you, yeah. That's like putting your training shoes on in the jungle, isn't it? So you have to run the bear or whatever it is. So you talk about these amazing achievements. So come on, blow your own trumpet. Tell me some more of these things you achieved.
So in 1991, 92, I sailed. My first big project for me was to sail around an island called the Isle of Wight. Now, I appreciate many people won't know where that is, but it's off the south coast of England. It's the mecca for yachting. It's where the America's Cup was first ever raced, in the Solent, off the Isle of Wight. And it's, I can see it. I look out my window and I see the Isle of Wight every day. It's 60 miles, 55, 60 miles to sail around the Isle of Wight. So I sailed around the island in my dinghy, this 15-foot trimaran. And it was I got back after a few hours, and I thought, wow, I could do that again. With a good night's sleep, I could do that again. And then I started thinking, well, if I sailed 60 miles, slept, 60 miles, slept, 60 miles, if you think the way I do, before you know it, you're sailing around Britain, because it's 1,500 miles around Britain. So it took me, crikey, 10, 15 years to get to that point. I found sponsors, I found a crew, and in May 2007, I set sail from Southampton, and on my first massive challenge, which was to sail around Britain in this little 15-foot dinghy. I did it. It took 110 days to get round. I visited 51 harbours around the country. So that's 51 starts, 51 stops. There was me, my wife, and my 5-year-old son in a motorhome, with an RV vehicle. We'd never been in one before in our lives. And when we moved a 5-year-old child into it, I had a crew minibus, a crew motorhome for 4 members of my crew. I had a Land Rover, and I had my own private rib support boat. So this whole, what we called it Personal Everest. And then that set off in May, and we got back in September that year. And without doubt, even today, I've done some other things, but without doubt, that sits there at the absolute pinnacle of what I did.
Yes, and I mean, the thing is, people don't realise we're a small island, but we've got some pretty challenging coastal waters. You know.
Oh my goodness, yeah. I mean, it's the North Sea. It's the Irish Sea and the North. I mean, it is. First of all, I should say the country it is beautiful. I thought I knew England and Scotland very well, but I didn't know it quite as well as I thought. It's stunningly beautiful, and I got to see it at nice slow speed. And every night we had these 51 stopovers around the country. Tremendously treacherous. There were a few very significantly dangerous bad times. The weather was just foul, and it very nearly capsized me a few times. And it was challenging. And I was every day. I was cold. I was wet. I was tired. I was hungry. All that stuff. But people don't want to know all that. They just want to know, Jesus, how did you do it? And I'm not sure anyone will ever quite do that again. And then 18 months later, I decided. When I was young,
if I can just jump in for a second, talk to me about when you'd finished it, because a lot of people, when they finish or achieve a goal, they go through this sort of slump, don't they? And this is another form of resilience, isn't it? The people don't understand this thing about the resilience you need actually coping with success, because often you come down from this high. It's a bit like when you're in a musical show or something, the show wraps. You achieve this massive goal. Tell me about how you dealt with all that.
Yeah, I mean, to understand that, if I can just go back a bit then to the resilience of going around Britain. So, there was one period, for example, for 3 weeks, I was stuck in a harbour in Wales, and every day I had the media on the phone to me saying, "Have you finished? Is this over?" And my sponsors saying, "What's going on?" And my crew saying, "What's going on?" And I learned then to really, really dig deep. I mean, really dig deep. The easiest thing to do then was to call it off and say, "Do you know what? It's too tough. I'm disabled. It's too windy." And everyone would have said, "Geoff, that's fine." But I couldn't have accepted that for me. So all this pressure was building and building and building. And one thing I did do to take some of the pressure off, and this is, I guess it helps with resilience, is I delegated. I've always been a bit of a control freak, and I think anyone who will claim to be resilient has an element of being a control freak about them. You like to micromanage. We like to, we're the masters of our destiny. I realised I needed to delegate on this trip, and when I did, it did take some pressure off me. That delegation was about making decisions about whether we sailed or not. I obfuscated those to my skipper.
So people often talk about digging deep. So how did you do it? What does digging deep mean?
Digging deep for me was not sleeping for 3 or 4 days, lying awake, wrestling with the rights and wrongs, wrestling of wanting to do the right thing by my crew, by my sponsors. It was pressure, the most significant pressure I think I've ever felt. Parallel to all of that, I'm still having to be looked after every minute of the day by my wife. And so all of those disability factors around what you can and can't do. And I have always called upon, when I was in hospital for a year, it seemed like it was never ending. That was my first experience of entering a tunnel or entering a forest, if you like, and no light.
Yeah.
Because I didn't know what was at the end. And I just didn't know when. There was the uncertainty. And I guess there's a parallel now with COVID, isn't there? You kind of, we've entered this period of uncertainty, and that plays heavily on people's minds, whatever your age, sex, race, religion. We deal with it in different ways. And it wasn't, when I got out of hospital, I remember really clearly that feeling of, do you know what? Things do get better. Yeah. There is light at the end of the tunnel. That tunnel particularly was a year long. Yeah. And when I sailed around the Isle of Wight, the smaller one, I remember thinking, is this ever going to end? And when it finishes, whenever you finish a project of that magnitude, whether it's a year in hospital, sailing around the Isle of Wight, sailing around Great Britain, there is a release of pressure. And it is an overwhelming, when I crossed the finishing line in Southampton in 2007, I was looking forward to the day the BBC were there with the cameras, and they came out on a boat and they were interviewing me. And I crossed the finishing line and all the horns went and there was, people cheering. I burst into tears. Yeah. And I don't know where that came from. I had no idea. And all I remember saying was, the BBC said to me, "What next?" And I quoted Sir Steve Redgrave, who won the Olympics in 2012. He said, he was rower. He said, "If you ever see me again in a boat, you have my permission to shoot me." Yeah. And I just said that, and I was blubbing, and I thought, where's this coming from? And I realised it was this relief of, I've done it. Do you know what? I've done it. They said I couldn't do it. I've been told it's not possible. But I believed in myself. I truly believed it, and it happened. And then, from, I know this is made a lot of English analogies here, but I can't remember what year it was that we won the Rugby World Cup. And Johnny Wilkinson, when you see him holding his hands and looking at the posts before he kicks that final ball, it was all about visualizing the end game. Yeah. And I realized then that I'd stumbled across this. I hadn't been taught it. No, I hadn't read it in a book. But I'd stumbled across this ability to visualize the end game, visualize crossing the line, visualize completing something. And no matter how, it just makes life more, whether it's right or wrong, I'm able to cope with things better. Yes. I'm not sure if that answers your question or raises more questions.
Well, no, because actually, so there's sort of 2 points. First, it's interesting how you're motivated by told you can't do something. And I think a lot of people with resilience do have that slight, I want to be polite, how do we put it? Sort of contrariness.
Yeah.
Stubbornness or whatever it might be, because it's a really good thing, isn't it? But the second thing is, so you cross the line a week later, then do you do that massive slump when you go back to real sort of original life almost?
Well, I'd made myself some promises when I crossed the line that life was going to change. I was going to declutter my life, because I'd lived for 100 days in a motorhome with nothing. Yeah. And it was some of the 100 happiest days of my life I could remember. Yeah. We had family, we had friends with us. It was just lovely. No phones. Yeah. There was no phone reception. There was no newspapers, no radio. Yeah. And I said, I'm going to get back and declutter. All of this stuff is going. Of course, it never happened. You slip straight back into, I was kept quite busy because I was immediately doing a round of media interviews and press stuff. And so continually it was on your mind. And I was being asked regularly, what next? I did take myself away, and I shut myself away for nearly 3 months, and I wrote a book. And that was very cathartic, because it wasn't just about, sorry, I'm not trying to plug it, but because it was part of that process of coming to terms with what I did. And so it was very cathartic to get it. It was the story of my life. It wasn't just sailing around Britain. It was the story of my life. And I needed to get that out, and I needed to get it told. My son was born in 2002, Tim, and he was 5-6 years old when we got back. So I would say there wasn't really a slump, but if there was an emptiness, it came 3 or 4 months later, and that's when I kind of started to think, what can I do next? And that's a dangerous thing. Yeah. I'm not convinced that that's the right mentality for adventurers or any trophy hunters to So I've done something, what next? You're always asked, what next, what next, what next? If you're going to do something next, this is my belief, it has to it has to be part of the narrative of your life.
Yes.
And what I mean by that, and that is quite, and I'm not going to name anyone individually, but I know people, friends who've been injured whilst in service in the Middle East, and they've lost limbs and they've become disabled, and it's horrific. They have quite quickly gone into the Paralympics. They have then climbed mountains. They've then, what's next? I go to the South Pole. There's all these what next, highest, longest, fastest. But what's the narrative to that?
Yes.
How does that fit into your life?
Into your life, yeah.
And I've been absolutely clear that sailing is the being on the water is the thread. From the moment I could eat, speak, and breathe, I was on a boat. You know, I left school, it was boating. I had an accident whilst working near a boat. I've helped set up a national sailing charity for this is many years ago for sailing. And then I sailed around Britain, and then I did the Atlantic Ocean. I haven't no time necessarily to mention all of that, but I did the Atlantic in 2010 on a much bigger boat, a 60-foot catamaran in my wheelchair. And so I realized that whatever I do, that narrative has to be true to me, because it's no longer, when I sailed around Britain, it was about me. It was selfish. It was a vanity project, you could say. I get back and there were thousands, literally thousands of emails and messages from disabled people saying, you've inspired me to go sailing, or you've inspired me to do something. And I suddenly realized that what I'd done, what I'd created is some responsibility to my kindred spirits. You know, my fellow disabled people had seen someone with my disability and buck the system. And through bloody mindedness and sheer hard work and determination, I've managed to achieve something that many people may never achieve.
Yes.
I'm always a little bit careful. When people say they're inspired by what I do, I don't hold myself out to be a role model, or I'm far from it. But if people feel that they have taken something from my experiences and it has helped them in some way, then who am I to question that? Yeah. But I did realize then that I've had this massive following. And so when I sailed the Atlantic in 2010, it was very much, the message was different. This wasn't, look at me, I'm in a wheelchair, I'm sailing the Atlantic. Yeah. It was, why don't you look at disabled people in a different way? Why don't we look at this boat? The universal design of this boat means I can sail it. Why aren't we getting more disabled people out having lived life experiences, high value experiences? And sorry, I can waffle on for ages. You can tell it's a passion of mine.
I can. No, and tell us about Wet Wheels Foundation then. Tell us more about that, because I'm guessing that's sort of culmination. We're going to skip quite a lot of your life out, which I'm sure people will be able to find. We'll talk about that later. But you've obviously created something which is your...
So I get back from the Atlantic, and now this, I've now sailed an ocean, so now this is global. This isn't just Southampton or Hampshire or the UK. Globally, people have seen what I've done, and I am getting, at the time, emails, phone calls on a daily basis. How can I get on the water? How can I get on the water? They might live in all different parts of the world. Well, I can't change the world overnight, but one thing I could do was understand how we could change things here in the UK. And we've got 240 sailing charities in the UK. Wow. 240, which is incredible. Yeah. But I know for a fact that there are disabled people who are excluded from that. Not for any other reason. There's two reasons. One, they physically want to stay in their wheelchairs, and there's no sailing charities in the UK. There's only one in the world, I think, where you can go in your big electric power wheelchair. People will challenge me on that, but I will push back straight away. There is not a sailing charity where you can go in your heavy electric wheelchair. There's also nowhere where, and a lot of people who use heavy electric wheelchairs are often at the end of the spectrum. They are the most profound and complex, what we call PMLD, so profound multiple learning disabilities. These are young people who are coming from hospices, who are coming from, special education needs, who have life-limiting disabilities. Yeah. So they cannot go on a sailboat. So you've got those people, and then you've got the people who just don't want to go sailing. And not everyone, my wife included, doesn't want to get on a sailboat and go left, right, and then it's windy and it's not windy. And they want an hour, 90 minutes on the water, having some fun. And I realised then that the important bit was getting on the water. It wasn't the sailing, it was getting on the water. And I had to think, how can I get these people on the water? And I looked around and there were no power boats, there were no big boats with engines on to get these people on the water. So I part mortgaged my house. Suzuki Marine helped me with some engines, and Ray Marine with the electronics, and a company called Cheetah Marine did me a deal on the boat. I mean, this is a £200,000, so thick end of $260,000 boat, and I got that first boat in 2011. And one of the things I wanted was that it had to be a shared experience, so it had to be big enough to take mum, dad, brother, sister. It also, everyone, and I mean everyone, had to be able to drive the boat. Yeah. I wanted a boat where someone with a profound disability could go under the steering wheel, and for a moment in time, they could be captain of wet wheels. Of course, my skipper holds the throttles and holds the wheel, but they're in the captain's seat, in their wheelchairs. And so we created Wet Wheels, and without boring you with all the history, so that was 2011. I started with one boat, and we took 300 people that first year. 2 weeks ago, we launched our 6th Wet Wheels boat in Falmouth, and we're now taking over 8,000 people a year on the water. Right. And 80% have never been on the water before. Yeah. And no one else is doing this. No one else in the world is doing this. Yeah. And the Princess Royal, so Princess Anne, the Queen's daughter, is my patron of the charity. And I'm, as you can tell, I'm passionate about it, because it just enables people to get into that maritime environment for a moment in time, with their mums, dads, brothers, sisters, share that experience. And we know that helps build confidence. We know it helps reduce anxiety. Right. And I could not have had, I get more pleasure from this than I can tell you. That satisfaction of sitting back, just making it happen. I mean, it's got a whole wrapper of resilience around that we've not even talked about. You know, each boat, £200,000. Each boat costs £60,000 a year to run it. You know, that I had to raise over $1 million for the boats. Wow. And I do that on my own, and it's not easy. But it's hugely rewarding.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So tell me, Geoff, how can people find out more?
Well, I guess the first and foremost is to go to a website called wetwheelsfoundation.org, and that's the National Charities Foundation website. So that will direct you to your local operator. And for those in the UK, we have Yorkshire and Whitby in Yorkshire. Dover in Kent. We have 2 in Hampshire on the south coast, 1 in the Channel Islands and 1 in Falmouth in Cornwall. Yeah. And we would love to help get people out on the water. And we've got some great Facebook pages as well. Just type Wet Wheels into Facebook, and you will see all of our operators on there.
Yeah, there's a real joy on people's faces. I can see how it would be great for mental health and confidence, and all that.
The key thing to mention is you can watch the videos, you can look at the pictures. Nothing sets you up for that moment on the water. But so they pot around the harbour. We go around the harbours and we spend 30, 40 minutes. Isn't that nice? And look at that. And maybe you'll see a dolphin or a seal or something. And then you go out, and then, are you ready? Bang. And all of a sudden, there's people doing 30 knots on a boat, which is, the boat will go faster, but we limit it to 30 knots. And the squeals of joy and genuine, even people who can't articulate themselves verbally, you'll see the smile on the face, and it's worth $1 million.
Right, blimey. Well, wetwheelsfoundation.org is the place to go. And even if you just want to help in a small way, there's a donate button that I see there. And you can find out more about Geoff and the work he does. And I didn't realize you were right across the UK, but I see you are. So that's brilliant. Geoff, you've been a joy to talk to today. I've been absolutely fascinated by it. And it's a very practical story. And I can't, I'm not going to say you're an inspiration because you get uncomfortable with all that, but what you have done is sort of, it shows what's possible for people with the cognitive skill to be able to dig deep, to have that stubbornness, to have that cause.
I cannot complete a story without saying it. Elaine, my wife, is very much part of the story.
Yes.
She's the hero in all of this because, what you're looking at today and what we're talking about, we haven't seen Elaine getting up at 4:00 this morning to help me get ready for this. Yes. And she has the little quiet role in the back, but so we're very much a team. And I'm, and I wouldn't get where maybe there's a bit of my mindset that helps me, with my attitude. But I'm lucky to have good people around me.
And I think that's the case. It's an important thing. It's no one does anything really in life on their own. It is that who's your posse, who's your team around you, and that's vital. And you're right. It's astonishing how many significant others are there for us who quietly get on with it in the background, without all that other stuff that goes on. Lovely, Geoff. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you.
Take care. Hi, everybody. I hope you found that episode useful and interesting. Feedback is always welcomed, and if you are in the mood to subscribe to us or even leave a comment on iTunes or Stitcher, that would be amazing. If you want to suggest ideas or even people you would like me to interview, then reach out to us at qedod.com/contact. As I said earlier, you can go to qedod.com/podcasts for show notes or follow the links. And you can go to qedod.com/extras to access offers, tools and resources, including free articles and ebooks. For those of you that would be interested in supporting our work and contributing more proactively, you can find our new Patreon page at patreon.com. Then search for Resilience Unraveled. I look forward to being in your ear next time around. Take care.